God's word comes from us from Micah chapter 6, beginning with verse 6. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Amen.
On Thursday night, an African-American 19-year-old young man was shot by police, resulting in shootings and fire bombings for the rest of the evening. For the next 5 days, riots took place, shootings and fire bombings swept through the city. More than likely, we're weary of hearing such news, finding out about another shooting, another tragedy, another young life cut short. We'll probably at least take a moment to say, oh my, and can't we move on? We may wonder, well, what happened this time? Where did this one happen? This one is from Lawrence, Kansas, July the 17th, 1970. A few weeks after this incident in Lawrence, with riots, burnings, shootings, unrest in Topeka and the Kansas City area, I was back in my hometown getting ready to go off to seminary. I was having lunch at my parents' house when the phone rang. My dad answered the phone and said, "John, it's for you." I thought, well, it's probably one of my friends that found out I'm in town for a couple of days. I go to the phone and, "Hello, Mr. Martin? Are you the John Martin who was at Camp Washunga this summer with a group of people from Topeka, Kansas City, Lansing?" I said, "Yes, I was at the camp this summer. Camp Washunga, part of Rock Springs 4-H camp." And the woman said, "Well, Mr. Martin, do you remember a young man?" And told me his name. And I said, "Oh yeah, I remember him. Neat kid, lots of fun. We had a great time together. He was a little older, and so we interacted. Great smile, athletic." I said, "Yeah, I think he might be a professional football player someday. Neat kid." She said, "Well, Mr. Martin, I'm calling you because this young man has been accused of accosting 3 young women on such and such a night." And I said, "Oh, he couldn't have. He was at camp." She said, "We know that. But the 3 girls' attorney are saying that he left camp, got a ride to Topeka, accosted these girls, and went back to camp. Can you say whether he was at camp between X time and X time?" I said, "Well, I don't know. I think he was there." And she said, "Well, the reason I'm asking is they're having a preliminary hearing day after tomorrow, and we'd like for you to come and testify on his behalf." Did I mention this young man was African American? And the 3 girls were white. Did I remember? Could I say? And weren't they having riots? I said, well, I don't know. And she said, Mr. Martin, you're the only one I can find. Would you seriously consider coming? I said, well, let me think about it. She'll say, please call me no later than noon tomorrow. Went back and told my parents. I talked it over with friends, and almost to a person, they were in total and full agreement. No! What does the Lord require? What does God require? What does God require of us? This is Peace with Justice Sunday. In the United Methodist Church, we celebrate Peace with Justice Sunday once a year as we talk about peace on earth. But there's a recognition that peace can only happen when justice is served. What does the Lord require of us? What are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to live? How are we supposed to get along with each other in this world? We know there's still violence. And why do you go back and dredge up this scene from 1970, John? You could have gone to this morning's paper. I didn't have time to read the whole thing. I read 3 pages and there was another shooting. And we know a couple of days ago, a law enforcement officer was shot in Oklahoma, not very far away from here. We can think about Baltimore, about Ferguson, Missouri, about the threatened lawsuit in Wichita. We don't have to dredge up things from 1970 or past experiences. We can talk about today. And what does this have to do with Micah 6:18, John? Well, the prophet Micah asked an eternal question. What does God ask of us? What does the Lord require? We probably all have a list. I've got a list. You probably got a list. We have a list of what God expects of us and what God requires. We probably all got a list. And in some ways, our list would not disagree totally with Micah's list. His first one is, well, shall I come bow down before God? And we say, well, of course, we need to worship God. Is that really what God asked? And we say, well, we need to offer significant gifts to God. Let's offer a new calf, or let's offer something. We know we need to give offerings. Well, Micah ups the ante and said, shall I come with 10,000 cattle or 10,000 gallons of oil and give that all to God as a sacrifice? In other words, shall I give everything? We say, well, yeah, we're supposed to give our whole selves to God, so we're with you, Micah. And Micah says, is that really what God wants? And then there's that verse. It's right there in the text. Shall I come to God and offer my firstborn as a sacrifice and the fruit of my body for the forgiveness of the sins of my soul? And we say, well, we're well past that human sacrifice business, John. We don't do that stuff anymore. Well, let me extend a little invitation to you. The first thing, when you hear that verse, you begin to process it. I'd invite you to think carefully about what your understanding of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ is all about. But secondly, we may say we don't demand forgive human sacrifice anymore. But I got to thinking about that in my own life. And I really began to wonder, what about all those people who either live in the brink of poverty or live on the edge of poverty, who lack resources, who are starving, who are threatened by rising waters? What about those people who live on nothing in other lands in the world? What about those people who live in poverty in the United States? What about all those who have lack of resources? What about those who are fleeing their homes in Mexico, Central America, and South America to find a better life? And I'm saying, what about all those who are refugees from the war in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran? What about all of those who are victims of the war? Americans, Iraqis, Iranians, Afghanis, Syrians. What about the people of Africa who experience kidnapping, who experience violence against them? Also, all of them, a sacrifice. So I can drive my car, turn on my computer with its electricity, have heat and air conditioning, have my cup of coffee, and live in a nice, safe place. What does the Lord require? Well, I didn't do this at 8:30, but let me just sneak this in right now. I'm here to tell you, God doesn't require us to feel guilty. No. But I do think God does invite us to think. What does God require about our relationship with people of color in our lives, in our world? We like to think that we don't require sacrifice, yet article in the New Yorker magazine, May the 11th, 2015, says that in the state of Maryland, where Baltimore is, that had riots, and so many people say, why in the world are they doing this? In the state of Maryland, just a little under 30% of the population of the entire state is black. Just a little over 70% of the population of the prisons and jails in the state of Maryland is black. You and I like to think of justice as saying, well, justice is making sure that those bad people go to prison. And indeed, we want that. We want our children and our youth protected. We want them to be safe. There's no doubt about that. But is there really justice when we see that 30% of the population has a 70% reputation in prison? We have a hunch of what peace is, and for most of us, we like to think that peace is the opposite of conflict and war. That's not what peace is, but we like to think of it that way. Peace, shalom, God's peace, is well-being, health, goodness, blessing, and fullness of life for everybody. Now, we often think, well, can't we just have peace? And to a great extent, we live pretty peaceful lives. Oh, we may get mad at somebody every once in a while, but on the whole, our lives are pretty peaceful. But we may need to ask ourselves at what cost. Probably the best example of peace without justice is the old concept of Pax Romana. Pax, the Latin word for peace, Romana, Rome, Roman peace. Pax Romana was a motto of the Roman Empire that said, we'll bring peace to your life. Now, peace came at a cost. Peace came at the cost of the Roman Empire saying, you're going to do what we tell you to do. And if anybody even threatens to disagree with us, we're going to do away with you. And this little system called crucifixion. And in order to keep you all, the masses, calm, we're going to take you into these big arenas and have these great contests of violence where people are hurting each other and entertaining you, and you can sit and watch them, and you can eat and drink and feel good. We don't do that kind of stuff anymore, so. Yeah, they say we keep the peace. Was there justice? And you say, well, we don't know, John. What's justice? Walter Brueggemann. I've quoted him before. I'll quote him again. Old Testament scholar. Brueggemann says, justice, the doing of justice, according to him, is the prophetic invitation to do what needs to be done to enable the poor and the disadvantaged and the neglected to participate in the resources and the wealth of the community. I think Dr. Brueggemann has caught what Mike is saying. He said, wait a minute, John, that doesn't have anything to do with peace. Well, let's think about that for just a moment. If you and I and everybody are doing justice, are loving kindness, and walking humbly with God, what else could there be other than peace and shalom and well-being for everybody? We'd have so much peace we wouldn't know what to do with it. Simple. Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with God. I went to Topeka, met with a group of people at an office across from the courthouse. They said, we're glad you're here. Thank you for arriving. We want you to go to this hearing. We're not sure exactly what will happen, but thank you for being here. Now, we'll walk with you over there. We're not sure, but we know that there's a lot of uncomfortableness, a lot of tension around race relationships, and this young man is African American and the girls were white, so we're going to go with you. We don't think anything will happen. And I was fine, I wasn't scared. I was just a little above terrified. Nothing happened. We went over, I sat in the room for a while. Before long, they called me into another room. It was just a table, and sitting at the table were a judge at one end, the young man's court-appointed attorney, the girl's attorney, same attorney representing all three girls, the girls, their parents. Court-appointed attorney said, Mr. Martin, who are you? I said who I was. Thank you very much. No further questions. The girl's attorney said, well, Mr. Martin, only question I have is, can you say, beyond a shadow of a doubt, for certainty, can you prove that this young man was at camp between X hour and X hour? And I said, well, I can't prove it exactly. No further questions. So I looked back over at the court-appointed attorney and said, I think that's your opening. I'm not an attorney. I don't know anything about this. But I kind of thought we could have a follow-up, maybe? Thought that's it. I was pretty frustrated. The judge said, Mr. Martin, I have a couple of questions. Oh, I didn't know you could ask questions. He said, what did you do do at this camp? And I said, well, I was the camp director. And he said, well, were you kind of aware of what was going on? I said, yeah, most of the time. Well, what did you do during the evenings? And I said, well, I usually get up 2 or 3 times a night and walk around the camp, see what was happening, see who was doing what. And he said, well, do you remember seeing this young man? And I said, well, yeah, I remember seeing him at dinner, and then I think there was an activity later in the evening, and I'm sure I saw him then. And I saw him the next morning pretty early. Well, Mr. Martin, do you think this young man could have left camp, gotten a ride to Topeka, accosted 3 young women, and driven back to camp, and you wouldn't have known anything about it? And I said, no, I really don't think that could have happened. He said, thank you. You're dismissed. Walked back to the office, drove back to my hometown. Thought, that's that. I wonder what happened. People that had called me thanked me and listened to me express my frustration that I thought the young man's attorney could have done a little bit more. Went on my way. Could have done the right thing. I mean, I kind of stuck this big old neck out quite a little bit. I mean, I knew this kid 4 or 5 days. Thought he'd be the next Otis Taylor for the Kansas City Chiefs. And I really didn't know him that well. I mean, what does it mean to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God? I found out a few weeks later that after my testimony, the judge dismissed the charges against the young man. A few days after that, these 3 young women who were close friends had apparently been out a few weeks before the night in question. And they'd seen this young man, and he was a good-looking kid. And apparently they'd flirted with him, really kind of made over him, and tried to get him to go with them. And he refused. And they got angry. So on the night in question, they'd been out again, partying, stayed out way too late. They colluded amongst themselves and said, we're going to be in trouble. We better come up with a story. And so they said, hey, we could get ourselves out of trouble and get somebody else in trouble. Let's accuse him. They finally admitted what they'd done and recanted their accusation. Whew. I have to admit, I'm a little embarrassed to tell this story. I'm embarrassed, first of all, because John, if you didn't realize that was a long time ago, what have you done since? Well, I've done a lot. I mean, I've taken stands on behalf of nonviolence. I've taken stands on behalf of gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender persons. I've taken stands on behalf of those who live in poverty and live with very few resources. I've done some things, but what have I really done to speak on behalf of and work with persons of color? How am I working to improve the lives of African Americans, Asians, Hispanics, legal and undocumented immigrants? How am I working to improve the lives of those from the Middle East, especially when people protest their religious celebrations? How am I improving the lives of people with color? What have I done since 1970? Second reason I'm embarrassed. I like to tell this story because it makes me look good. Makes me look like pretty brave guy. I usually tell the story and kind of end right there and say, gee, I did it once, maybe I'll accidentally do it again. And as I thought about this story, I realized I'm not the hero of this story at all. Not in any way, shape, or form. Yeah, I kept a kid out of jail. But I'm not the hero. I'll tell you who the hero of the story really is. A woman in an office in Topeka working for civil rights for all people who took up the cause of an African American kid whom she wanted to make sure had the best help possible. She's the hero of this story. She is the one who needs to be thanked. If she hadn't have decided to do something quietly, behind the scenes, unnoticed, no soapbox, no testimony, but if she hadn't decided to do something and made a phone call to me and convinced me to go to Topeka, an injustice would have happened. And then I began to realize that means you're the heroes. The people who work quietly, unassumingly, behind the scenes, every day, to make other people's lives better, to care for those in need, and to transform our world into a place